Swedish perspective, it's a bit of a mess. It's a bit embarrassing to not be able to select a woman at the absolute top. That we tend to think of Sweden as much more gender equal than it in fact is.
Hi, Lena Wängnerud. You're sitting in Sweden, in Gothenburg. Welcome to Debates on Europe. Yes, you're sitting in Gothenburg, where you are a professor of political science. Actually, you are one of Europe's foremost experts on women's representation in politics. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Last year, at the end of last year, Sweden got its first female prime minister, Magdalena Andersson. This was more or less exactly 100 years since women received the right to vote for the Swedish parliament, a fact that was celebrated last year as the birth of an anniversary that was celebrated as the birth of Swedish democracy. Sweden is in the world regarded as a model when it comes to equality, and the country actually even practices officially a feminist foreign policy. But why has it taken so long for this country to become a woman at the very top?
Oh, thank you very much for this question. I have received this question for over the past 20 years, I think. So this has been debated for quite a long time. And in fact, it's kind of a puzzle why Sweden has taken such a long time. And Sweden is a multi-party system. And in the parliament, currently there are 8 parties. But in fact, there are 2 parties that more realistically can appoint the prime minister. And this is the Social Democratic Party and the Moderate Party, which is a conservative party. And I think that the part of the explanation or the reason for this situation is that those 2 parties have been very powerful parties for a long period. And a lot of research shows that when there is a lot of power concentrated to a few actors, it's really, really hard for women to come forward. There has been women in the past that has had some kind of realistic chance of being elected as prime minister. I'm here thinking of Anna Lindh, who was the foreign minister in a previous social democratic government. She was assassinated. So this is partly a situation of, how to say, factors that none of the parties really can control. But I think that the Social Democratic Party and the Moderate Conservative Party, they have not taken this issue seriously enough, because they have not planned for having a large number of women to select from when there has been a situation of change in the party leadership. So I think that power is part of the story, and also a bit of naivety, that we tend to think of Sweden as much more gender equal than it in fact is.
At the same time, the Swedish parliament, Riksdagen, is actually the most equal in the EU. It has more or less exactly 50% women represented, 49.6%, I think. The average in the EU is 33%. In Eastern Europe, it's far lower. In Hungary, for example, 13%. Why is it important to have women represented in parliament and in politics?
Oh, it's very important for a lot of reasons. A lot of research, including research from myself, show that women and men tend to think differently or partly differently about politics and give priority to slightly different issues. For example, we have seen when the number of women in the Swedish parliament has increased, which it has since the 1970s, so more or less in a steady path. we can see that female politicians tend to prioritize those issues that are very important for female voters. And this has to do with gender equality in the more narrow sense, but also how to handle the conflict between having a paid job and a family, the kind of balance that you need to do in your everyday life. So we can see the female politicians as pushing for more generous parental leave legislation, but also for more public childcare, for instance, in order to be able to have both a career and a family. And this is common across party lines, but we can also see that, of course, ideology comes into this situation. So it's not the case that all women agree on all kinds of issues, but within their own parties, female politicians have been pushing for gender equality issues, but also issues that has to do with this balance between paid work and family life.
Mm-hmm. And is it, in your mind, important to have a woman at the very top? Is that just within quotes a politics of symbol, or is it does it have something important content-wise as well, do you think?
In a country such as Sweden, I think it's more of a symbolic issue. And the reason is because we have such a high number of women in the cabinet, but also in the parliament. And this is the most important thing, I would say. But in other countries where you don't have that high number of women in the parliament or in the cabinet, I think that having a female prime minister perhaps matter more than in a country such as Sweden. But of course, this is very important for symbolic reasons. And this is to show that it's possible to break the glass ceiling, so to speak, to actually have a woman also in the top positions. But I think it's the combination of having a woman as a prime minister in the top with women also on the other levels. I mean, one woman as a prime minister without the support of other women, what is she able to do? Well, not that much, I would say.
What has the reaction been to Magdalena Andersson becoming prime minister?
When she was elected, I think that, I mean, people from all kinds of different parties were quite happy. I mean, finally, at last, we have a woman also as a prime minister in Sweden, because it has started to be a bit embarrassing, especially in the international arena, since we have this high profile when it comes to gender equality, a feminist foreign policy, etc. It's a bit embarrassing to not be able to select a woman at the absolute top. So also, she was congratulated also from members of other parties in the parliament.
Also in the debate before, because it was not clear from the start that she would become the successor of Stefan Löfven, the former Social Democratic Party leader and prime minister. In that debate, the fact that Magdalena Andersson was a woman was, of course, thematized, and it became at the top of in all the headlines and so on. But being a woman was also described in terms of competence rather than as a symbol. Is this right?
Well, it depends on what you mean here by competence. I mean, a lot of research show that women in one way are more competent than men when it comes to figuring out the values or priorities of female voters. And in politics, that's a very important part of competence. But I mean, Magdalena Andersson, she's a person that has been seen as very competent. She was formerly the Minister of Finance, and she's an economist by education, etc. So she's in very many respects seen as a very competent politician, both in gender terms, but also in other ways. So, and I think that very important part of the story is that she has a strong support within her own party, but she's also seen as competent across other party lines.
Yes. Now she's, however, governing in a very difficult parliamentary situation. Sweden will have general elections this year in autumn, and the opinion polls show that the Social Democrats have gained support among the electorate since Magdalena Andersson took over. However, she's governing now on the budget of the opposition, which is something very difficult to understand if you look at it from the outside, if you don't understand the Swedish system. What is it actually that what does the Swedish parliamentary situation actually look like?
Oh. Well, from a Swedish perspective, it's a bit of a mess. I mean, it's not worse than has been the case in many other European countries, but we have one of the weakest governments ever in Sweden at the moment, since the Green Party left the cabinet last fall, and now it's a single-party social democratic government. And the base in the parliament is very, very weak. And therefore, the opposition managed to get their budget through, because the parties formerly supporting the Social Democrats and the Green Party, when both of them were in government, they chose to support their own budget policies or alternatives. And therefore, the Social Democratic priority fell in the election, and the opposition could get their budget through. And of course, this is a very problematic situation for the government, but it does not mean that it cannot rule, and it does not mean that it cannot get through their own policies or alternatives. Because, I mean, the budget is one thing, and then you have other propositions made. And in those situations, the government can negotiate with other parties in the parliament. So yes, the situation is a bit messy, but it does not mean that the government cannot rule Sweden. But of course, we hope for a more stable situation after the election in September this year.
Do you see any prospects of that? Because it seems that the growth of the right-wing populist party, the Sweden Democrats, have messed up the old bloc system of Swedish politics in a way that makes it at least not improbable that one would have to get used to these kind of shifting majorities and so on. Is that an overinterpretation of the current situation?
No, it's not. It's a very realistic interpretation or picture of the situation. And I think that the parties need to agree on how to handle the budget, because this is really a key area, of course, in doing politics. And formerly, it was the case that the parties in government, they were expected to govern on their own budget, and the other parties, they were expected to, well, not go in coalition with each other as opposition, but support their own budget alternative. And then we had a situation where the government would win the votes on the budget. And I think that, but in the last few years, the parties have broken this informal rule, and now they do whatever they want with the budget, it seems like. But I think that they need to agree on a way to handle the budget situation. Because, of course, a government can rule on this kind of jumping coalitions, but it's very hard, and it's very hard to get this more long-term perspective on politics in that kind of situation.
And does this need constitutional reform, or can it be done in an easier way?
It can be done in an easier, more informal ways, in a kind of agreement, because this was done previously, But then, of course, party leaders in the different parties, they shift, and old agreements, they don't feel that attached to them. So therefore, I think there is a need to do this more informal agreement once more. And perhaps it's a need to be done in the beginning of each mandate period.
As a final question, as I mentioned, Sweden will have general elections later this year in autumn. What are the main issues that are being raised in the election campaign?
I think that this election campaign will be characterized by a multitude of different issues that are, currently debated. And right now it has a lot to do, of course, with the pandemic, with the COVID situation, but also with foreign policy and security, and also internal security, criminality, etc. But and those are kind of typical male issues. But then, of course, you also have the debate about the health system, and those kind of issues are more traditionally female areas of politics. So I think that health issues, security, but also criminality will be three issues.
I think that no matter what the Swedes will discuss in the next months, I'm sure that Sweden will continue to be a place to look at when it comes to equality and when it comes to integrating also women's perspectives into mainstream politics. Thank you, Lena Wängnerud, for this talk and for giving us insight into the way Sweden works. Thank you very much and stay healthy.
Thank you.